I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Urbana Civilian Review Board, Wednesday, April 22nd. Roll call, please.
Tom Costello.
Here.
Ricardo Diaz. Scott Dossett. Here. Diane Gottheil. Here. James McNeely. And Ivy Williams. Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Okay. With that, approval of the minutes?
I had a comment or a request for.
Why don't you reiterate that?
Yeah. Okay. I've got something that I drafted, so I can pass that along to Tony. But as it came into play later during a city council meeting, I wanted to just clarify. My amendment is during old business. Member Diaz noted that the draft TASER review policy as related to CPRB had a clause inserted into it which seemed to indicate that cases of TASER display or discharged would be batched into lots of 4 before they are forwarded to the CPRB. Members were not happy with this addition. At least I felt as if the majority of the members, including the chair, were not happy with this, so you can wordsmith this as you like. Feeling that the public deserved a prompt case-by-case analysis of display or discharge, the chair assured the board that changes would be requested to this item, and that's pretty much all that we said at that point in time. So that's my request for change to the minutes.
Why don't you submit that, and we'll take a look at that. And I think in light of the fact that we're going to have a report on tasers this evening anyway, might clarify some of that for us as well. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, my main reason for bringing it up is because the next Monday, when I went to a city council meeting, I stated that the batching of 4 was not something that we were interested in doing, and the council, in fact, changed that to not batch.
Wasn't that from legal? Did that come flying down?
Yeah,
from,
yeah.
Is that right? Did that come flying down from legal?
And there are some.
I'm not assessing blame. I'm just asking where it came from.
Yeah. And there is justification given during the meeting, and I took 6 or 8 questions on your all's part, kind of, as I gave testimony to the council. So.
Well, I mean, we appreciate legal's opinion, and we disagreed with it, and we went from there. I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Okay, staff report, Mr. Brent.
So I apologize for the lateness of the report in front of you. Since the last report that was filed in January, we've had 2 additional cases, 2015-1 and 2015-4. In the first case, it was filed on the 23rd of January. The incident date was actually the 21st of January, and it was the findings were completed on the March 13th. It was an improper procedure case. It occurred on Cottage Grove. It was a split decision. It was founded in part, and in the second part, it was deemed to have insufficient evidence. There was some counseling involved, and so going on to the next one, we do not have a finding in that case yet, but I believe the police are still working on that.
Are you talking about 2015-4?
Yeah.
Okay.
And can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
And so by counseling, does that mean that the complainant, you and the chief, or the chief and the chief, talked about this, and the person who issued the complaint, I can't remember what category we put these that basically sort of get weeded out as you talk through the system. What kind of counseling are you referring to?
That is the verbiage that's used in the letter, that was used in the letter, so I probably should not speak to that specifically.
Okay. But it resulted in a pre-appeal
It was a founded. It was a founded complaint. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions on those?
Anything else on where we're at with those? Yeah, Tony?
Do we want to go ahead and approve the minutes as amended then?
Oh.
I have a second from Ms. Gottheil, but I,
Okay, thank you, I'm sorry.
sorry,
I'm sorry. That's why you're here, to make sure I behave myself.
or a
So
motion rather, not
I
a second.
appreciate that, okay. So we have a motion to approve, do we have a second on the minutes?
Second.
Okay, and then with Scott's edits, do we have an approval?
Aye.
All in favor say aye. Yeah, because I think that accurately reflects what went on, Scott. That's true. Opposed, same sign? Okay, I think we're there now. Thank you. Thanks. Okay, now you can go back in order again, the way I'm supposed to be doing that. All right. Okay. Well, I don't want to, if you want, I think it would be appropriate if you want to speak to the chief or Lieutenant Searles, whoever was involved in that case. I think we can do that and discuss what the counseling level was.
Yeah.
If you want to take care of that.
Yeah, I'd never heard that phrase used.
Well,
so-
we use it all the time.
Okay.
We use it all the time. Essentially, we're talking over what went on, how we ought to do it. We counsel the employee.
Although I would stress, so the phrase is a general term, but in terms of the specific discussions of the details, that's probably not within the scope of our purview
Oh,
of the
certainly.
CPRB,
Yeah.
because
Right.
we
But I
don't
think we
deal
could
with
get
discipline.
explained what counseling is.
Yeah, well, what I was looking for is clarity as to whether or not you interacted with the complainant in the normal process that the ordinance talks about, or whether it was something to do.
No, so what happens is when we receive a complaint, the complaint comes in, normally, actually most often it comes directly to the police department. The police initiate the investigation. At the initiation of the investigation, they actually send a letter, a certified letter to the complaint.
I understand
Or
that.
to the complainant, and then once they've issued the findings, they send another letter to the complainant,
Right. I understand that.
sort of explaining the findings. So there's not unless it's initiated by the complainant, there's not a lot of communication with my office specifically. It just depends on how it comes in, though.
Okay. All right.
Okay, public participation. Seeing none, old business. I think we're ready for review of the TASER ordinance.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you pretty quickly through the procedure and get any questions that you might have. Has everybody had a chance to review it? And I'm going to go pretty quickly so that we can get to the chief, because I think that's probably more substantive in nature. So the City Council passed the amendment to the CPRB ordinance, which directs the CPRB to review incidents of the use or display of tasers by Urbana police officers. When there's been a use or display of a taser, the UPD, the police department, will initiate an investigation. Once they've completed their investigation and have all of the reports and the entire file completed and finished, then they will submit that to the HRO for redaction. My office will then redact the reports, get out all of the private information and all of the things that should not be released in the reports. Once we have that, we will get it back to the CPRB within 7 days. And then that taser review, or the review of that taser usage, along with any others that come up in the interim, will be undertaken at the next regularly scheduled CPRB meeting. When that review is completed, then we will write up the results of that review, submit it to the chief, and then he will have 14 days to issue a written response. So it's quite similar to the typical process with complaints. If there's a complaint filed regarding the same incident, then there will be no taser review, because we have a CPRB complaint that supersedes that or preempts that taser review. Also, the scope of the CPRB's review is limited to reviewing the policy of the police department and making recommendations for the modification of the policy based upon trends that you see in the aggregate, not speaking to individual officer behavior, speaking to individual reports. And I'd invite everyone to read over, I'm just providing a very brief summary, so please feel free to read over the entire ordinance and ask any questions that you may have.
When you say a review at our next meeting, do you mean at a regular scheduled meeting, an open discussion, public, not a closed?
You know what, I'll double check on that,
Yeah.
but because we're not actually mentioning anyone in particular,
Right.
we're supposed to be reviewing these as redacted, depersonalized, de-identified documents. I believe that that's going to happen.
And will we have that, the report in advance of the meeting, or the information?
Yes, so we will get you the redacted report within 7 days of the actual incident. So I can imagine the only time when we wouldn't have that to you is if something occurred, 3 days before, and they finished the report 3 days before the meeting, then most likely either we would hold it until the next meeting, or we would issue the redacted version to you and give you the option as to whether or not you wanted to review it at that time.
Another question. So, I want to make sure I understand. So the amendments to the CPRB ordinance have been passed?
Yes, yes.
I had one more question.
Sure.
Maybe I should be able to figure this out in context, but I don't read this stuff. What's the division for that is mentioned?
That, I think that's the section of the
Of the code?
of the ordinance.
The ordinance.
Of the CPRB ordinance.
CPRB
I believe
ordinance.
so, yes.
Okay, because I read through this carefully, but I didn't try to follow.
Yeah, I
where
think
it-
because this is supposed to be patched in to the ordinance, and so when you read it, just kind of read it like we're going to stuff it right into the ordinance.
Okay, thank
At the
you.
appropriate place.
Yeah.
So the fact that a word seems to be left out, it's too late to,
I don't know. Where do you see a word?
I
like
think, I think I would make that suggestion, because sometimes
Yeah.
clerical
It-
errors occur.
it's-
Poor Tony's been
It's
blamed for
Scrivener
more
errors.
stuff he didn't do in the history of mankind. So if there is a clerical error, I think we can mention that and see if we get that just corrected.
it's not exactly dotting an I, but it's close.
that? Yes. But it's definitely not Tony's responsibility. Just
Well,
like to
we
put
blame
that on the
everything
record.
on Tony, that's
I'd like
why.
to put that on the record.
Well, Diane, let me ask you a question. Is it like germane to the intent of the ordinance? I mean, does it?
Absolutely not.
Okay,
So it's
so we don't
non-substantive.
lack clarity
Really
because
picky.
of what you saw.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Well, why don't you just give that to him and say, we really need to fix this. I think we can get that addressed.
It might have already.
Stranger things than that have happened, I can tell you, in the history of ordinance making. Okay? Anybody have anything else on this? So my intention is that we really want to take a look at this much more closely, Todd, so that, excuse me, that we're in a position that when we have to deal with this, that we're ready to deal with it. We're not, flying blind here. Okay? The ordinance is in place, and we just want to make sure that we're certain of what our responsibilities are.
Great.
That-
Any other questions about the ordinance itself?
I guess I do, in the sense of, it's written that it would come up, but the nature of the regular complaints seems to be, the calendar is kind of long. Whereas a taser, both complaint, we're putting it at 7 days, but our meetings are quarterly. So it seems to me like the pace of a taser complaint would be much faster than what we normally meet. And I guess the chair can call a meeting, at more regular intervals than our regular, right?
I think so. I think if we felt some need to do that, I don't see any reason why we couldn't. If we start, heaven forbid, and I do not foresee that. Let's say, for example, we have a rash. Somebody's going to want to say, what's going on here? I'm sure the chief's going to be dealing with it, the department's going to be dealing with it, and we're going to be dealing with it as well. And we're still not going to sit there and say, well, we'll wait 3 months before we deal with that. I don't think that's something we want to. Then I don't think we're doing our job.
Right, but the pacing of a complaint, if it starts out as a complaint, is normal. So it is a cycle of about 3 months.
Sure. Yeah,
there's- about, by the time it bubbles up to,
But the review is much quicker. The investigation, the review and all that.
Well, yeah, I think we would anticipate that it would take less time to put the information together for the TASER review.
Yeah. Pat, can you sit up so
Yeah.
you help us out here, please?
If I understand, Mr. Diaz, your question, if you're talking about a police, a member of our community is tased by the police, we actually deploy the probes and he or she is tased, and they now want to file a complaint against the police department, like they do for any other
Other.
type of misconduct. If I understand Mr. Rent's process, which, you know, if the state's attorney's office says, okay, we are not going to charge them criminally, we would go through the process just like we would do any
Every
other
other
complaint that is filed. What we have to remember is what we did when we came to you guys and helped to write the policy and whatnot was, we said we want to be more forthcoming in every time we deploy it. So even without a complaint, we want to present you with our actions and you would serve as the oversight for the way in which we either displayed or used the TASER. And if there is no citizen complaint involved, then we would process it at the next one. As an example, we're going to talk tonight a little bit about where we're at in the process. We'll talk about the policy. And we started this March 10th with our 6 crisis intervention team officers, and not until April 21st did we have our first event. This last night, we had an event where the TASER was displayed. Lieutenant Searle, as part of the protocol, Lieutenant Searle shared with Todd Rent today that we are now in the process of gathering all that information, and we'll get it to him, and within 7 days, we'll have that information to you. But I think for a complaint filed against the police officer, I think the time frame is going to have to be the same.
it's the same because it's a complaint to an officer, not just the taser use.
Correct.
Displayed. Okay, so my question on that side is, I think the way it's written now, when it comes up, then we have a short cycle. It comes up in 10 days, or at least we're notified, and it comes back. What happened to the accumulation of 4 before it comes up to us? I just
So
want to get
was
that
not
on the
by
table.
council.
That was canceled?
Yeah, it's not in the ordinance.
It's not in the ordinance, okay. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I've had questions, and I'm like, well, I don't see it, I don't remember.
But just to clarify, very similar to the police complaints, when the police department is conducting sort of their review of the TASER usage, there's really not a time limit on that I can see. You just take whatever time is needed. And then once you get the documents to us and you say, hey, this file is complete, then at that point, we have 7 days to do the redaction.
Well, that's good, because when I heard that a little earlier, I just wrote that to Rich and said, wow, we got to get all this, because we're nowhere near.
Did I misstate that before?
Well, maybe I misunderstood
No,
what
it
you
did
said.
sound like it was.
Yeah.
I got the impression
quick.
we had to have this all
No,
ready
no,
for
no.
you in 7 days,
You all
and I thought,
do
wow.
what you do, you get us the report, then we have 7 days in which to make redactions, and we
Perfect.
submit it to the CPRB.
Perfect. So, all right, that sounds much better.
All right, before we go on, are there any other questions or discussions on the ordinance itself? And then I'd like to go to the chief and Lieutenant Searles and let them go through where they're at in terms of, and it's interesting that we had a situation last night, which is a
Yeah.
little bit more timely, but.
Well, I guess we just have one request. Todd, if we could just get kind of a quick, okay, within whatever time period you're going to get it, whatever time period you're going to redact, how long we have to review before the chief gets back, sort of a short summary of that chronology would be helpful for me. I'm not
Sure.
sure it's in the ordinance. I mean,
Yes, it's in the ordinance.
Well, it must be in several places in the ordinance, and I didn't put that together.
Why don't
But
you-
yeah, we'll put it
Put
together.
together some
We'll
little
put together a
sheet.
quick cheat sheet.
If A,
Yeah.
then B, and C, and then I think that'll just make it easier for us, and then we can take a look at the timetable a bit more clearly.
Well, I mean, to me, it's relevant to what the question that Ricardo asked at first, because essentially, after you get done with your redaction, it's incumbent upon us to go in to review these and get our own idea about it. But then how do you, if we're supposed to get any kind of feedback back to the chief, how does that happen within Does that happen within a time frame?
No, the
No?
way that the ordinance is written, it says that you all will, then, once I've submitted it to you after the 7 days of redaction or whatever.
okay.
Then at that point, you all will take that TASER review, or that TASER information, and whatever other TASER uses you have,
Okay.
and review those
Okay.
at your next regularly
Okay.
scheduled quarterly meeting.
Okay?
So the way that the council designed it, it would be quarter to quarter. And
Right.
then if there were 5 in that time period between meetings, then that's how many you'd have. If there were 2, that's how many you'd have.
So if somebody sees onerous use, then they have to petition the chair for a meeting that's not a regular meeting? Or are we literally saying that we're only going to talk about tasers once every quarter?
So the ordinance says at the next regularly
Regular
scheduled
meeting.
meeting.
Okay.
I'm not exactly
All right.
sure what a variance would require.
Right, okay, right. Thank you.
All right, so I'm sorry, Tom. Actually, as chair, let me request to put this on the table if, for next time. Last time we reviewed a case all the way through, we were short on procedures. And here, at least the way I read the ordinance, the word review is very nice, the word, but they're good words until you have to do it, and then you say, so what is the procedure for review? And so I'd like to put it on the table that before we have to do it, we put something down as to at least a recommended review of, of what a review looks like.
Sure. I think I'm going to address that directly because I've heard that several times throughout the months, and I just want to be very clear. So in each case where we've actually had a review of a case, there was a detailed, and I mean detailed, description of everything that needed to happen during the course of that case. And the reason that that was the case is that we have due process requirements that we would have to fulfill in order to make sure that everyone's treated fairly. Now, there are times when you may veer from that chart and you may veer from that very, very detailed description of what's happening, but that's what has been provided. And so we would provide no less in this case. So you should expect that at the next quarterly meeting, there will be a very detailed description on what's required for TASER review in order to make sure that we have the appropriate mechanisms in place to make sure everyone's fairly heard and everyone gets to say their say.
I think I agree with you, but I don't think it would hurt at all for us to just kind of go through and make sure that we're refreshed and comfortable as to what the procedure would be. Ricardo, I like that idea in terms of saying, okay, what are we going to do when we're faced with this? I don't think that's as opposed to having the first time be the first time. Let's see if we at least have a discussion about it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
So second small point, because this is new information. There was a display yesterday of a TASER.
Correct.
In training or in actual use?
No, in actual use.
In actual use. So given what we've just discussed, it means that as you mentioned, Mr. Rent, then it would be at the next quarterly review. So in 3 months, 4 times 3 is 12. So in 3 months, we would be reviewing last night display.
Yes, but you'll have it within 7 days of the close of the police department's review of the
Okay.
case.
Okay, so we'll have it, we can look at it. It is supposed to be publicly or, at the meeting dealt with, but we have no instruction as to what happens if our chair deems it after 10 days, he sees we need to deal with it fast, for whatever reason.
Well, if that happens, then we'll create something prior to the 3-month interval.
Okay, all right. Just
Would
trying.
it be possible sometime before the next regularly scheduled meeting to meet to discuss procedure, what a review means?
Especially because as we have our first one, and
We know we're
it's
going to have one.
low-key, but it's our practice run. I just don't want to get caught in a situation where there is one, and again, God forbid, it is not an easy one to deal with, and our procedures are still being worked out. That would be, to me, a disservice to the intention of the process.
Well, as soon as you get the report from the chief, you're going to redact and then publish to us, right? We will know that that will be available in the same place where the complaints are filed or whatever, different file, for us to view, right? Oh, you're going to email us? Oh, okay, okay. Oh, okay, well, great, thank you. That's what it says? Yeah, okay.
And it's public. You're emailing it to us.
We're emailing it to you as part of the administrative process. So because it will still be considered under the administrative process, it's not public until
Right,
we
right.
discuss it.
Right. So if I,
It's like it's like if we're doing an administrative hearing in another case, whatever materials that you all receive beforehand have to be contained until the hearing.
right, so if I have a problem with what the review says after this one for the 21st comes through, I can email back to you, you can distribute, we got to do Open Meetings Act stuff, right? So I can't just buckshot my opinion about this thing to everybody else, but we'll all have an opportunity to see it and to have opinions about it and voice them to the chair. If we need to schedule a non-standard quarterly regular meeting, then that's what we'll ask Tom to do.
That's right,
To
as a
shorten
chair.
that interval, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, we would be delighted, Chief, if you and Lieutenant Searles would tell us where we're at, and particularly, as I said, the timeliness of having display last night really makes us all the more poignant for us to realize what are we doing, and let's make sure we're on the right track and we're heading in the right direction.
Excellent. And in the packet, as I understand it, is the version of the policy that will now be, actually, Rich completed training to the 6 crisis intervention team officers on March 9th of this year, a 12-hour class. I'm going to ask Rich to review a little of that training with you just so you get an overview of it. A great deal of that time involved dissecting this policy. So this is the policy that Scott and Ricardo helped develop with providing input and some thought. This is the policy that we're going to use with respect to issues in the future. And the only other document, and I don't know, and they also, both Ricardo and Scott helped me with that as well, and I asked Rich to provide it today, this is the document that is used by the police officer the night of the display, or the night or day of the display, so that we can start collecting as much data as possible so that we are able to track this throughout the years. So this is actually a 2-sided document. There's a great deal of oversight. In this pilot program, I want to make sure that we do this right. And as we see issues evolve, we need to address them and correct them. So I'm more than willing to add additional information as you deem necessary for us to be able to collect as much data and guide the police department for the future as much as possible. But, and I won't speak very, I will speak very generally to last night's event, but don't forget the difference between a display, which means simply taking the taser out of the holster. That is considered a display. Anytime it comes out of the holster, I want it reported so that you know the effectiveness of it, whether or not there were issues involved. You will see how it's used, and then the actual discharge, I keep getting that term, is that when the probes come out of the taser and actually are and strike the person. So that's a discharge. Last night we had a display, and it was an event where a person was attempting to or contemplating suicide by way of using a knife to his throat. We were able to work with him, some great police work. A majority of it is on video. We have to redact that video to protect the identity of, because these are mental health related issues in this case. So we're going to cleanse that video to the point where we're going to present it to you folks, and then you will have an opportunity to see how that display worked. So you're right, Tom, it is timely that last night that happened. However, this was scheduled long before last night's event. So I wanted to just basically answer any questions concerning the taser policy itself. But before we do that, as I said, Rich is our master trainer. He went down to St. Louis and trained. He then worked with the 6 crisis intervention team officers on the 12-hour block of instruction, and maybe you can just give us a little overview with respect to that.
Sure. Like the chief said, we conducted a 12-hour training day on March the 9th. We started at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we finished at 7 o'clock at night. Yes, we had lunch, too. So I put together a PowerPoint. My wife tells me I'm only supposed to have 1 thought per slide. I failed miserably in that thought process. It can only be described as death by PowerPoint. That's what I did. I had over 300 slides that I presented. It covered everything that was required to be covered in the ordinance. The policy. I literally went through the policy and said, okay, do I have this? Do I have that? And so everything that we talked about in the subcommittee meeting being included is included. So this is the manual that each officer got. These are all the slides, and there are 3 slides per page. So as you can tell, there's quite a bit of information in here. I discussed a number of different things. We started out with a block on what we call verbal judo, which is basically verbal de-escalation techniques. Lieutenant Sanders came in and did that. He's sort of our resident expert on mental health related issues. And then we moved into a block of controlled tactics refresher, which is kind of the physical methods of taking people into custody or controlling them. And we had Sergeant Norton come in and do that. He's a long-time trainer at the police department. He also teaches at the Police Training Institute. He teaches controlled tactics. And then we moved into the required training from there. Some of the training was required to be taught by Taser International because we use their product. I have to use some of their things, and that's what they tell me in the instructor class. But I added on things that were specific to the city of Urbana, things that were specific to our policy. We talked about a number of different things, starting with just basic nomenclature. What are the different parts called? Handling, manipulation of the taser, the policy. We talked. I had the chief come in and we talked about. And when the chief says, I want to be very clear about something, the chief talks about, I taught 6 officers. That 6 includes me, so I actually taught 5. So we have 6 tasers on the street, and I have one of those as well. So we talked about the policy. The chief came in and he talked about his vision and his intent behind things, and this was an opportunity for the officers to say, kind of present some what ifs to them. And so the chief spoke for, 45 minutes maybe, and we talked about some of those what ifs. And so it was an opportunity. It wasn't there wasn't an agenda or a list of things we were supposed to discuss. It was literally just open questions for the chief. We talked about the basics of how the taser works, and so they had an understanding of kind of the mechanics of it. We talked about how to provide first aid, and we gave them a block on that. Every officer that came to the training was actually tased. I ended up doing the tasing. I did not get tased. I still have a bum knee. My doctor won't let me get tased right now, but it's coming. So the officers also fired live cartridges and training cartridges, and we practiced, working on targeting and things like that. The list really goes on. I mean, this was a full day, so it was an exhausting day. It was a long day. The officers did a great job, and I can tell you from having a follow-up conversation with the officers afterwards, when I was buying them an adult beverage, they understand and appreciate how the tasers actually worked because they were tased. That was one of the things we kind of talked about. Really, we wanted them to experience it, and that was a valuable experience to them, and they appreciated that. And I'm glad we did that. That was one of the things that I kind of brought with me after I went to class, and the chief agreed with it, and ultimately the subcommittee agreed with it, and the city council agreed with it, and I'm glad we did it. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
When they were tased, when they're tased, are they used with the same, for lack of a better word, I can't think of, voltage that you would use with a regular person? You didn't dummy
Yes.
that experience down,
Yes.
any? Okay.
Yes, I put in the same, I ordered one kind of live cartridge, and those cartridges are the cartridges that I tase them with, and those are the cartridges that they carry. There's literally a safety on the taser and a trigger, and other than that, there's nothing that can be modified. We can't turn down the power or turn it up. They had
They
the full,
experienced it to the fullest extent then?
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
And then I have another question.
Yes,
I don't know
ma'am.
whether it's appropriate. How were the officers, since it's just a total of 5, how were they chosen? How did you choose these officers? What made them stand out that they would may be the officers for this
So
pilot?
the chief and I sat down and we talked about, first of all, in order to be eligible to carry a taser, you had to be what's called CIT certified, Crisis Intervention Team certified, and this is a week-long class on dealing with mentally ill. So our pool went from the 55 officers to about 20 officers that we have as CIT certified. Amongst those 20 officers, we went through and we said, okay, we'd like to get a relatively even distribution among shifts, but that being said, we also want to pick people that we know are thoughtful. And
That are?
Thoughtful.
Thoughtful, help me with.
In generally. Just,
Okay. Okay.
that.
Well, when I thought about it, I was thinking maybe you chose officers that you knew would take the patients and would probably choose de-escalation
That
and not
is-
so hurriedly go to the taser.
That's exactly what I mean
patients.
when I say
Okay,
thoughtful.
that's what I
We wanted to pick people that we thought were bright and, understood the policy and could understand some of the nuances in there. And we just literally went through and kind of did a pros and cons on each individual officers and said, we want to have good representatives from the police department who we think will carry this pilot project through and do a fine job.
I do need to clarify that of the 20, and I don't know exactly how many CIT officers there are, but there were not only 5 officers that were eligible for this. Quite frankly, a majority of the CITs, if not all of them, would be readily willing and capable and able to carry a taser and
But because we're doing this as a pilot program,
and
we've got
we
5.
only have 6, we had to
sure.
be very limited. So
Right.
I think the biggest focus was the ability to spread those 6 out so that they were available in the event we needed them at 2 in the morning or 2 in the afternoon on a Sunday or on a Tuesday. Mathematically, that's very difficult because every 6 months our shifts change, but we only have 6, so we're going to make do with what we have. That's one of the reasons why Lieutenant Searles, who is on day or evenings, now is in a position where he is carrying one so that it is available on the street as often as possible.
That helps me and it makes sense, but it also means an awful lot that you took the time to think about the thoughtfulness, the patience, and those other personal interactive skills that those individuals will have when coming in, dealing with those.
And I
Individuals.
appreciate that.
So that helps a lot.
You know, when people say, and I hear it all the time, everybody on the police department should be CIT certified, Crisis Intervention Team certified. And I am telling you that with 55 police officers, there are some police officers on the police department who say, look, I'm not a social worker. I'm not interested in delving into behavioral issues and developing relationships with community elements and hospitals, and I want to go out and perform my job and be a function. So we're not going to force or compel people to do jobs, just like there are those that are fabulous in mathematics and are capable of doing an accident reconstruction that is, that could literally place a vehicle based on the squall marks and all of the different mathematical issues involved. And there are those that say, look, that's above my, I'm not interested in that. I don't understand the concept behind it. So they wouldn't be very effective in that position. I wouldn't hand someone a taser and say, you're a police officer, therefore you have to do it. Certainly we do that with firearms because it's a part of the job. Certainly. We do, yeah. But selecting the crisis intervention team officers that are capable of doing this, quite honestly, I feel very confident that of the pool of CITs that we have now, any one of them are capable of doing the job. Some of them have expressed an interest in saying, look, I don't want to be tased. I'm 18 years on the job and I'm not interested in that. And I'm not going to compel them to be a part of that process then.
So, I'm trying to remember where I left off. We were talking about training generally. I'm sorry, TASER International required me to present certain pieces of information. That's just the way it is. Like I have to read their legal disclaimer at the beginning, for example. So the other portion of training that the chief has asked me to discuss is not just the training with the TASER officers, but the training with the rest of the department. One of the things that TASER does is they also provide some information to give presentations for non-TASER carrying officers. And I've presented that information to all but 2 officers on the police department. Their schedules just haven't quite worked out, but I'm going to find them in probably the next week. So 53 officers I've presented this information to, and I've also gone through and explained the policy and the chief's interpretation of the policy to all of these officers, so they understand. Because there's certain things that non-taser carrying officers need to understand. For example, they need to have a basic understanding of how a taser works. They need to have an understanding of what our policy is, so they can't say, Officer Conley, come up here because he's got a taser, come up here and tase this person when it doesn't meet the policy. So they need to have a working knowledge as well. Probably the biggest reason that it is important to review these things with non-taser officers is if everybody is on the same page in terms of tactics and how we will address people after we've deployed the taser or discharged the taser, I can actually reduce the force used, because if one of the concepts that we teach is what's called controlling or cuffing while it's going on, okay? And so if I can get somebody under control or handcuffed while the taser is energized, I can reduce the amount of force that I have to use down the line. If I can get them under control under the first one, I don't have to use a second time. So that's very important to present to the officers as well, and that's one of the reasons that we went throughout the whole department to give that information. So that's in the works. Like I said, I've got 2 officers left, and I will get them very soon, and that's one of the things that I'll be documenting in my memo.
In addition to that training, we just as a very short review, we also there's ongoing crisis intervention team training. As a matter of fact, we have department-wide training both yesterday and tomorrow, and part of that process is continuing to talk about behavior disorders because we are facing so many more of them. How the police officers will work with one another, not only within our department, but basically as a county-wide law enforcement perspective, so that if we have an excited delirium event, a person walking down the middle of the street, stripping his clothing, howling at the moon, and acting in a bizarre, super strength, sweating profusely, a stereotypical excited delirium event, Urbana police may also be tied up at an armed robbery investigation or something. We are going to we have trained throughout Champaign County to utilize U of I officers, county officers, Champaign City officers, so that we can pool our resources. Very quickly, we go through the line and we talk about what role and function is for the 6 participants involved in the takedown process of this, and then they each have a role and function. That's what Rich kind of explained with the rest of the police department, so that we also have an understanding, a basic understanding, and it'll be reiterated periodically to make sure we're all on the same page.
Question about that, because it came up as an advantage. Does that mean that a designated officer with a taser from another unit, if our designated person is busy and can't show up, does that mean that a taser deployed in Urbana will follow the rules of Urbana?
No. The taser deployed in Urbana is the rules apply to the officer who carries that taser.
So whatever law enforcement agency that they come from, they have to follow their rules for
Correct.
deploying.
Just like right now, the Illinois State Police could be conducting a traffic stop right outside the city building. They have a policy that they comply with, according to the Illinois State Police. We may not even ever know that the Illinois State Police are out there and that they discharged a taser, except that we typically work with one another and help them. And
Okay.
we would learn it only through there, but they would deploy that, they would discharge that taser based on their policy.
So for me, that is a validation, if you will. I had several questions from people, not wanting tasers at all, and if we don't have our own tasers with our own rules, it basically left us to other law enforcement agencies having to make the decision of when, how, and where.
Precisely correct. And that's why 1 year and 3 months ago or 4 months ago when this whole process started, I said, tasers are in our community now. We can control them. They don't have oversight. If the Illinois State Police discharge a taser this afternoon, they're not going to come before this panel and explain why they did what they did, and you're not going to have the opportunity to review it. The Illinois State Police have jurisdiction in 102 counties in the state of Illinois, and they have their own oversight process. We, however, can control our policies, the way that we implement our program, and have oversight and get guidance from you folks, and that's
I
why
think
I
that's good
appreciate you
clarification.
taking the time to do this.
Makes sense.
Can you tell me about the training of the supervisors?
So the supervisors, the non-taser carrying supervisors.
Do you have any sergeants that are going to carry tasers?
I have two.
Okay.
And that actually reminds me to speak of something else. The non-taser carrying supervisors received the same training that I provided the rest of the department. They received the same PowerPoint. We did the same policy review. I did this in large batches, as many people as I could. I got. So, one day I might have 5 detectives and 2 sergeants and 3 patrolmen and the deputy chief sitting there in front of the smart board. One day it might be 2 guys in my office looking at my computer. So, they did not get special training other than through the policy review. I outlined and highlighted their responsibilities that they had in terms of follow-up administrative investigations and evidence collection and things like that.
And I will also say, Tom, that a lot of the sergeants are also specialty positions. For instance, we have a sergeant who oversees the decision-making simulator, along with Rich, several of them actually. So they then integrate scenarios that are going to include, let's consider the taser, let's consider crisis intervention. We have defensive tactics sergeants, instructors who happen to be sergeants. So they actually sat through a lot of the taser training because their expertise, Jason Norton, as an example, who is taught at the Police Training Institute for the last 15 years in defensive tactics, was a big part of this policy because his expertise in what do you do after the taser is discharged, he was able to share that. So that overlap of the training, the supervisors providing that training, Rich providing the training to the supervisors, all I think, there isn't a defined category. It's kind of a blended category.
Okay. Well, as I think we've discussed as we've been going through this process, training, supervision, oversight. And I just want to make sure that we're covering all the bases with those 3 things. And I mean, that's what we're talking about tonight.
We are. And the document that Rich gave you is also going to help us immensely because anytime it comes out of the holster, we have a number of systems in place, starting with our Criminal Investigations Division, who actually oversees all of the reports. It starts there, a copy goes to Rich, Rich copies me, we contact Todd. So I think between all of us, we will have a good communication process to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks.
I have 2 more questions that are probably a little far afield from where we're at. One of which is, we just had a tragic incident where we had an officer mistake taser for weapon. Is there some issue? Is this an isolated incident? Has this happened? I know we had that same issue in San Francisco, which was the original one, the Fruitvale Station one. What kinds of things in the course of our training are we working on?
So that was specifically discussed in the training, confusion between the taser and a firearm. One of the parts of the policy actually requires officers to carry a taser. It's supposed to look different, and they're bright yellow. They're supposed to be worn differently than their duty firearm. So, if you're right-handed, you wear your firearm on your right side typically. If you're left-handed, you wear it on your left side. So they would be required to carry it on the opposite side. So for me, for example, I carry mine, my firearm's on my right hip, and I carry my taser on the left side of my chest. So it just feels very different. I've drawn my pistol 50,000 times in my career through practice and, marksmanship training, things like that. This is a very different motion than this, and I do it very differently. So, and that's one of the things that we practice in the training. I literally had them stand up and said, okay, start drawing your taser. And I said, after about 10 minutes, are you tired of doing this? And they said, yes. I said, good, keep doing it. Because that muscle memory and that repetition is very, very important. They have to do things a certain number of times in order to kind of get it ingrained in their brain. So yes, absolutely, that's something that we specifically train to. It's specifically outlined in the policy, specific requirements.
The other question I had, and I should know this, but I just simply don't. When the taser is presented, is the video on then?
Yes. So
I
the
know
way-
you said there was video. I just wondered, at which point does the,
So this is how it works, very generally, and this was by design, and this was something that we talked about for probably 20 minutes in the subcommittee. So the way I've explained it to the TASER officers, the moment the TASER comes out of the holster, the safety is off, and what that does is that powers up the TASER. It has the capability of firing. The other thing that does is that turns on the audio and video on the TASER. And that audio and video stays on unless the TASER runs out of power or there's actually a 20-minute auto shut-off. And it's just, if somebody leaves it on, they don't want to drain the battery. That's intentional. So they've been specifically instructed, when the TASER comes out of the holster, the safety is off, and it stays off until the TASER goes back to the holster. So we should capture as much video and audio as we possibly could. The holsters that I got them, if they shove it back into the holster, it's supposed to turn the safety off, and that's a feature of the holster. So I could see an example where in maybe a physical confrontation, they shove it back in the holster just to get it out of their hands, and it would turn the audio and video off. But yeah, that's the intent, is to have as much video and audio as possible.
all right, I have one last question, and I'll lay. My last question would be, what kind of feedback are you getting back from the officers now that you've done the training?
You're talking about the non-TASER training?
Both, quite frankly.
Well, I can tell you that I specifically had a conversation with one of my officers. I actually just sent him to the TASER instructor school because I felt like I needed to have a backup. So the department has 2 TASER certified instructors. This officer, he's not an officer, he's a sergeant. I asked him after he got back from the training, I said, so how was it? He said, I felt really prepared going in, and some of the things that you drilled in, they really drilled in too. The nice thing about the TASER instructor school is it's a 2-day class, so they're able to drill more things in, get more repetitions, do more scenario-based training. He was very, very comfortable with the training that we provided. Afterwards, again, when we were enjoying that adult beverage after the training had concluded, I asked him, I said, what did you think, guys and gals? And they said, you know what, we feel pretty prepared. It was good training. Thank you for doing it. So the TASER officers, I got very positive feedback from. The non-TASER officers, because it's such a novel concept here and because we haven't had it, everything is very new. So we've got some hurdles and some misconceptions to get past, and we're getting past those. And, little things like, well, I don't want to touch the person because, I'll feel the electricity too. No, that's not true, and let me explain to you why. Those are some of the sorts of things we're going through. And, the chief said, there's going to be some officers that aren't interested in carrying them. I can confirm that. I've already had one say, no, if we get TASERs for the whole department, do I have to carry one? No, you don't, because the policy says you have to experience it, and that's a voluntary program. So, thus far the feedback is good. I'm not quite sure what else to say.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else have
Actually,
any? I
Mr.
don't mean to
Chair.
monopolize the questions. These are things that I think I'm curious, and I think, quite frankly, the public would be curious about, so.
Actually, not the question directed to the officers, but in this case to you, isn't there a way, since one of our contributions is to educate, isn't there a way that we could put attached to this meeting a video of what the TASER looks like? There must be a promo of it that ought to go as public record, and especially because people tend to view this, the session. I know not everybody does. I wouldn't sit at home and watch them, and yet I have, because when they come on its background, and people could get a feeling for that. And maybe not only the promo, but also part of the training or seeing what it looks like, because as officers I've seen in town, they should know, people should know, oh, that yellow thing is a TASER.
Right. So with respect to the video that you're suggesting, of course, I can be overruled by the chief or y'all, but I would actually recommend the video that I showed both you and Mr. Dossett, which was a kind of a longer, maybe a 5-minute long video, and it explained kind of how the TASER worked. I don't know if you remember that one.
No, but that's the best part.
Okay.
We need to know. We're in the middle of the process, and without having one in front of us, I saw one. No, in fact, it was displayed and then discharged 2 months ago. My first time that came after we had worked on this. But to see a live one and to see how small it seems, but to know the power of it changed my mind of what it was. So anyway, if it's okay.
Well, we would be happy to provide that video if you want to put it on the CPRB website or on the Urbana Police Department website, whatever whatever.
I'm thinking of UPTV because they're the ones that transmit this session.
It is a publicly available video. You can get on the internet and find it, so it's not as though there's copyright or trademark concerns. Mr. Attorney, or soon to be.
Yeah, we'll be happy to do that.
Excellent, thank you.
Is that,
Yeah.
Todd, is that
both of them would
something
be
you want
great.
us to put together? Yep,
I'd be
we'll do
happy
that.
to. It's, yeah, you can download the video, and we're able to put it to disk, and we can hyperlink it.
Actually, we're having a suggestion that we do both, because that one has a usage, and the other one is the,
training. itself.
no, I'm thinking of the promo. The company sells it with a video, they
Right.
must. And,
That's the one I showed you.
yes, but is there another one, because that's the features one, but they must have some,
Well, here's what we can do. We do a program called Cops Corner. People ask questions about all kinds of stuff with police stuff.
Yeah.
And what we can do, Preston James is the facilitator of that program, and he does the interviews, and what we'll do is have an informative, educational spot on what the taser is, how it looks,
excellent.
and
I
how it
think
operates.
that's a
And then we
terrific idea.
We'll do that,
That's terrific.
okay?
Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, Yep.
Go ahead.
First of all, I just note that since 2014, Mike Schlosser's PowerPoint has been on the city website.
Correct.
Underneath the police department look. So that has lots of stuff about, way too much techno actually, about how the taser looks. But, you see examples of what they look like and stuff like that. So I think, continuing with the kind of thing that you're talking about, Ricardo, is fine. But if you've been on the City of Urbana website under police for a while, there's been a, conductive energy device presentation there available for people for, a year. So, so I had some questions. And I noticed that was on the back side of the second side, I guess, page 2, number of CEWU cycles applied. Do the tasers that we have actually report the number of cycles that they're used, either in the data file or as a counter, or is that something that you have to rely on the officer to say, I pulled the trigger twice or whatever?
No, that is recorded.
Yeah, okay, great. Then I had another question, and some of these next cluster maybe are going to get into this thing that I've tried to talk about here and in City Council, and that is having a transparent use of force policy on the police website for the City of Urbana, which I still think we need to work hard to do. And maybe this committee can help you guys do that in this same sort of like ad hoc subcommittee structure we used before. As you look at the output from the DOJ's report on Ferguson, which I hope we have just a couple of minutes to talk about, that kind of transparency, which I think we do a great job on. And I'm not equating us to that issue at all. We just need to keep on getting better. So there were a couple of places in the document for tasers, specifically 304.5. The use of force policy is referenced, and report to supervision is noted after the taser deployment. And I guess I was wondering, what are the details in the use of force policy which made it pertinent for that section of the taser use policy that we have?
You said 304.5, use of taser?
Yeah, 304.5.
Actually, I have a small question on that, and this is of Mr. Rent probably. Is the policy manual that we're looking at public, or are we only privy to it? Because I remember we had a discussion, Chief.
That went to the council. Public.
This
Right.
policy and all policies, shy of several of them, will be on the website, including the use of force policy. As soon as I shared with you in the subcommittee meeting, we're transitioning from traditional directives manual to a policy manual referred to as Lexipol, which is the company that we bought this from. And it's, as the subcommittee
used it,
folks
yeah.
can attest to, it is incredibly cumbersome with respect to the technical capabilities of making simple changes. But Sylvia, Deputy Chief Morgan, is that close to finishing those programs all of those policies, and
Great.
shy of a pursuit policy, for instance, which specifically outlines cars 1 and 2 will do this, and car 3 will do that. Shy of those, we are putting all of our policies on the
Good, so
website.
this policy is.
Correct.
So 3.5 will mean something to somebody else then?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Yeah, okay, well, that's fine. I was trying to actually find the specific paragraph in here so that we could, we could talk about this. I think it probably had reference to supervision. So the officer on the officer on the street, the guy, the CIT approved and extra training guy who pulls the taser, and either displays it or discharges it, reports to supervision as soon as possible, right? They're probably like circling the neighborhood at the time.
Correct.
And so the use of force policy that we will have or have now details what that display or discharge protocol would have been, and that's an opportunity then sort of like immediately for the displaying or discharging officer to talk to supervision and to make certain that the use of force policy has been followed, right?
So you're asking generally, how does a use of force happen with respect to a taser? Or
Well,
how
and,
should it happen?
and as it plays out in the field with the exchange between the officer and the supervisor.
Right. So the nuts and bolts of how this would work would be this. So Officer Searles goes to a call, and I decide that it's appropriate for me to discharge a taser. Let's say that Sergeant Connolly is not there. I would notify him on the radio. Please come over. He would come over, and once the situation is secure, because we're not stopping in the middle of the action to have a administrative discussion. We have to take care of the business that needs to be taken care of. And after the fact, when the scene is secure and everybody is safe, then I would explain to the sergeant, okay, this is what happened. These were the facts and circumstances. This is what I did. This is when I did this. This is when I did that. Okay, and so then in any higher level use of force situation, what the sergeant would then do is sort of a quick on the scene administrative inquiry. And so they would talk to me, they would talk to witness officers, they would talk to other witnesses. Let's say there was a woman standing on the porch. They would talk to her. They would try to talk to the person that I use force on. Sometimes they want to have that conversation, sometimes they don't. There's constitutional issues with Miranda, so they just try to talk to everybody to try to flesh out the picture in terms of what would happen. And so the sergeant typically would then document those things in just a regular police report. It would go in the police report. I talked to Jane Smith, and this is what she told me, and I talked to Sally Struthers, and she told me this, and that would just be documented in the police report, and then it's funneled through the case management system just like a regular police report.
Yeah, okay.
Higher levels means something shy of routine handcuff. Impact weapon. You struck somebody with a ASP, a collapsible baton. That higher level of use of force would have a supervisor investigation. Spraying someone with OC would have a higher level, and a supervisor would then conduct that investigation. When we pull our firearm out of our holster, this officer is required to report that information as part of the data that we collect, so that we can say, in 2014, our firearms were removed from our holster and pointed for whatever reason, and then it's articulated in the police report so that we can track all of that data. That's what this form is going to be. So in addition to the supervisor doing it, the officer discharging the taser or displaying it is also responsible. For instance, in the event last night, the officer that displayed it completed this document. This document becomes part of the police report.
I have a couple of related questions to that.
Sure,
Is that okay?
yeah, shoot, yeah, I got a list.
So, one, I was going back through policy to find out if we ever decided to write down who decided to use the taser. Because in the situation, we have it. And the three questions here, the three lines kind of say it, but they don't. Because there's a deployment officer, there's a supervisor, and then officer involved. Somewhere, the clarification for me should be the officer involved is the one that decided to use it, because whether heeding orders or decision at the split moment, So I don't know.
I remember that conversation. I'm trying to find it on the form. I poached this form, so there's bits and pieces from different places.
Okay.
Because I don't know if you remember, I said I need a one-page form. I
Yep.
did it.
I
by
know-
the way.
I know you did it.
There's a lot of stuff on there, but yes, that was something specifically mentioned and specifically covered with the TASER officers, that if you tase somebody at the direction of somebody else, that needs to be covered.
Yeah. So right now, it's ambiguous whether it would be recorded or not. It would require somebody asking, what does it mean between these three? So.
Right.
To
So,
get to-
so the officers have been given specific direction to provide that information.
Do it.
I have to go through the form to see if I can find it, because
It's okay.
I'm 90% sure it's on here.
Actually, it might be, and I didn't see it.
Okay.
But the next part is, because you're probably the one that did the policy revision. This looks so much cleaner than the last time we saw it.
I
There's-
did that,
oh,
thank
Yeah,
well,
you know, there's lies and damn lies. That was
all
a
right.
damn lie.
Well, no, there was a lot of technical stuff and whatever. Now it's almost in plain language, and it's a pleasure to read because I can see myself reading this and explaining it to somebody else when they ask me a question about it, because memory's fuzzy. So
Yes.
okay, we'll
Yes.
give it to him.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
The chief
All
can
right.
have
I'll
it. He
take
can
it.
have this one.
I need all the credit I can get lately.
All right.
So I had another one at 304.6.1, and it's just here, and I wish if a citizen came up to me and asked me this, I would have an answer for them. Number N said, did officers employ excited delirium protocol? What's the excited delirium protocol?
So the chief referenced that where countywide, we've got a policy where we would, and without getting too much into the nuts and bolts of how it works, it's a minimum number of officers doing specific tasks to control a person that we think might be in excited delirium. And the point behind it is to try to minimize injury to the subject and to the officers. And the way we minimize that is through using mass or number of officers. So we don't use one guy to try to deal with this person. We might have 4 or 5 or 6.
Yeah,
And the
okay.
protocol actually starts with the 911 call. MedCat has a flip chart that says, in the event there are certain criteria that are met, like it's February and there's a guy sweating profusely,
Right.
or he's got superhuman strength, or he seems, and I'm using this as to illustrate, he is howling at the moon. Those alone will trigger a supervisor to implement the excited delirium protocol. We had it at Eastland Suites as an example, where we have a guy who came, no clothing from the waist down, was standing in public and just babbling at patrons, at guests and kids as they were standing at the front counter. That alone will trigger an excited delirium. So we automatically send an ambulance because and the decision is the paramedics, but they may field sedate him with Versed or ketamine based on based on the totality of the circumstances.
Right.
But we will also, rather than 2 police officers striking a person suffering from a behavioral disorder, because you have to first buy into the concept that under excited delirium, which we used to call, positional asphyxia years ago, the polyester pile, a guy with superhuman strength is fighting with the police. 6 police officers jump on top of him. Everybody's trying to put pressure on him, and then he dies in police custody. Now we have a much different approach to that, where it is a medical condition. We have an ambulance standing by. We have specific job assignments, which we wouldn't articulate publicly.
right.
But those job assignments then control the person suffering from that situation, and then we try to control them as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Now, a taser may very well be deployed in
Right,
that
right.
to gain
I
control of
understand.
that person.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, next part of that whole thing. And I hear you, Pat, every time you talk about the use of force thing, but I'm just going to stay on this, okay? So you and I are at peace with this. What's the response to resistance committee?
Let me first address Mr. Diaz real quick. It is
Okay.
not on the form. I just double checked, and I will get it added. So
So we will add that.
I had it, and apparently it disappeared in one of my 17 revisions of this
It's okay, we're
form.
just
And if
pointing
you
it out.
see more stuff, folks, and you say, look, I want to learn more about this as we continue to progress through this pilot program, shoot me an email and say, what do you think about that? Now, some of them may be unrealistic, and some we could add tomorrow and bring it to you the next time
Rich, you might
around.
just have to shrink your people a little bit to fit it.
Yeah, our font's already at 8. I can't
So-
see it even with glasses.
Yeah, there's no harm in revising this. I did it. I've got the file. I can change it. It's no
It's
big
okay.
deal.
All right,
With
check
Another one.
with respect to what the response to resistance committee is, okay. So, response to resistance is a euphemism for use of force. Okay, and it is more appropriately articulating what police officers do. We respond to resistance because we have to. We're always acting based on somebody else's actions. So that's where that name comes from. What the committee is it's a committee of a number of people. There's a sergeant who's a control tactics instructor. There's a firearms trainer. There are detectives that understand general investigative techniques. There's a number of different sort of backgrounds that come on this committee, and this committee is more or less given oversight by the deputy chief. And what they do is every time we have a use of force, we indicate that on the report. There's a little checkbox, and it gets marked, and it gets flagged, and it goes to this committee, and the reports are divvied up. And individual officers or detectives or sergeants read these reports, and they get together and they have conversations about the uses of force for training needs, trends. Somebody needs to go to this training because they're not doing this correctly, or we need to do a refresher on that generally for the whole department because we're seeing it on a wider scale. They're looking for training needs primarily.
And they provide they analyze literally hundreds of police reports. And they, from that officer pulling that firearm out of his holster, that is tracked, starting with the case management system in the very beginning of this process. And then they determine whether or not they provide a report to me. And in that report, they say, here are some terminology issue. For instance, I am still struggling with discharge as a matter of a term. We need to be consistent in the police department. So these definitions have to be used as part of the process when police officers are articulating what they did and why they did it. And if there is improper terminology used, the use of force, or the response to resistance committee, used to be called the use of force committee, but now it's response to resistance, actually reviews it and says, we have officers who are repeatedly not articulating why they're going to an ASP or why they went to OC and then didn't go hands-on afterwards. So those trends are reported to me, and then we develop our training based on those. We also identify specific needs with officers who, for instance, may be going to a firearm routinely. Then maybe that's a training issue, or maybe that's a lack of education, or maybe that's another issue we need to look at.
Yeah, okay, great, well, thank you. So I thought about so in the context of the form and the tasers, a display is going to end up in the response to resistance
Yes.
committee. Okay. And 304.6.3, that's kind of the wrap up. It would be nice to have a time limit during which, well, in fact, it's not CPRB, so I guess I saw two errors here. CPRB doesn't really get notified. The HRO gets notified. And it would be nice to have a time limit, and I'm not necessarily trying to, I mean, you guys do work great so fast, but it would be nice, I always like to have deliverables set up ahead of time.
So this is what I can tell you. I can tell you that I personally was made aware of the taser display by the taser officer during the same shift. He sent me, it was a supervisor, he sent me an email, said this happened, here's some kind of a thumbnail sketch of what happened. I sent that on to the chief so he was aware, so he could start looking at some of the documentation. Unfortunately, the Vice President of the United States has decided to come to town, so he's monopolized some of my time, so I didn't get an opportunity yesterday to speak with Mr. Rent, but I found him today in the midst of his Chinese takeout food for lunch and said, Mr. Rent, I'm about to send you an email. Here's kind of the thumbnail sketch of what I know.
Yeah. I mean, I would just appreciate the policy having an outer
this is
limit,
what I
you
can
know.
tell you. As soon as I know, I'm going to be notifying the chief of police, and probably within 24, 48 hours, excluding weekends, of course.
Sure.
I'll be notifying Mr. Rent of its existence, and this is something he and I have specifically spoken about, and we've worked out an informal policy of who's going to get notified, because there's different pieces and parts of
Yeah,
who's
yeah,
going to be
yeah.
doing
Yeah,
what.
Here's my only
suggestion-
concern with the time. I watched the whole video from last night. It's going to be very difficult. Jason, who's phenomenal, Jason Liggett, is going to help Rich redact that so that we can present it to you folks
Yeah.
and still protect the integrity of those suffering from behavioral disorders or other
Oh, yeah,
issues
yeah, sure.
as they come into play. I have no idea how long that
Oh.
9 minutes of tape is going to take.
Absolutely.
So it would be very difficult to say within a week we'll get you these, or
And that, I wouldn't, if you asked me what kind of time limit would I like to have in here, I would probably say something on the order of 14 to 21 days. So I'm not talking about a number of hours here, but I'm just talking about our responsibility and oversight. So I'll just throw that out to you. How about a 14-day outer limit to report?
I can assure you of this, if I am in the state, Mr. Rent will know before 14 days.
oh no, or are you saying have the whole report to you?
No. The initial notification
Oh,
of the
I'm fine,
HRO.
Todd. If you want
you know,
14 days, I'll give.
Yeah. I mean, well, I don't know if anybody else wants a time limit or not, but as I read through these things, I mean, if something is open-ended,
I'm
you know,
sorry.
it's just like we could, you know.
Well, you can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I understand the need for possibly a time limit, but once you're told, I see a lot of other things, just like you were saying, having to go through the tapes and things, that could eventually change that time limit.
Right.
So I think open-ended, I'm comfortable with that in a sense, but I know that after you've done your investigation, because you need time to make sure that you've done everything reasonably possible to make sure and ensure that when it gets to us,
Right.
then we can move on with that 7
Right.
time limit. So,
My
I
other
don't know.
thought, Scott, for what it's worth, is that I can't imagine anybody in this department saying, let's sit on this one for a while, and then we'll present it, because ultimately we're going to get presented, because they don't want to put up with listening to us tell them, why on earth have you waited so long to let us know? I mean, that's just common sense to me. That, I mean, if I'm in their position, I'm saying to go, let's let them know, because if we're not doing that, we're certainly going to hear about it. That's part of why we're doing the oversight.
Well, absolutely. And if I were community member XYZ, who was critical of the police department and the function of the CPRB, I would say, why don't you guys put a time limit in there? That's what I would say.
But since we're not,
Well, I do represent some of those people, so
Well, don't
maybe
we
I'm-
all?
Maybe I'm having a voice
don't
for them.
care.
Okay, so I can move past that one. I mean, it's just a comment on the policy. In 304.7, so all officers who are using tasers are also trained in probe removal?
Correct.
Right? Okay. And in 304.8, there, as if we don't already have deployment still on the table, discharge and display, it says activation in 304.8.
Which paragraph? First or second?
Paragraph, the last line of the paragraph, the taser was activated.
Good catch. It should be changed.
Yeah, okay.
and we're going to change it to,
Displayed or discharged?
Quite frankly, it should read display, because the supervisor is going to need to take a look at it with a display.
Yeah. And that kind of led me into, I guess, the last thing I want to say, I'm going to shut up here for a while. On the top of the form, we have CEW deploying officer's name. So now we have a triad of syntax again. If I'm assuming that display happens first,
Oh, yes.
then can that just say display? And then if he went on to discharge it, the rest of the balance of the report? I mean, just so we have display, discharge, and not a third word for deployment. So,
Got it.
I'm just,
That's fine. Again, I
I think
I
we're
pushed this
striking
form.
deployment from the vocabulary.
I
Is
know.
that?
And that's my fault. We deploy OC, we deploy so many less lethal tools. It's a police
Right.
term that
Sure.
is
Yeah,
yeah.
constantly
Sure.
used.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I need to get out of that mindset. But yes, we'll fix those too.
It seemed to me, and it's germane to what you were just talking about, that maybe very near the beginning of the form, it should be specified whether it was display and discharge or just display, because it's not very clear unless you go into I mean, it's not very clear to me, because the form is going to be filled out if there's just a display, am I right?
Excuse me?
Yes.
The form will be completed by the officer who just displays.
Correct.
So maybe right near the,
So here's my thought process. I tried to lump pieces of information under headings. So, for example, the incident information, I'm looking for sort of broad explanations of what happened. And then the subject information, I'm focusing on the subject. And then I focus on officer injuries. And then specifics about the taser. That's what I was trying to do. I am not going to argue this form is perfect. I know it's not. I labored over it. I showed it to several people.
Now, in addition to this form, there is going to be an unauthored police report.
Yeah.
And in that police report, they will articulate in great detail, I removed the taser from the holster, deactivated the safety, at which point the video camera was activated. I mean, as an example. So this is more for tracking purposes, not an all-inclusive report, just for clarification.
I accept that, because I think it's true. You need a quick and dirty, and then you need the full. But since we're on it, no, because I just found in the policy the part in which we said, was it deployed? And it is item 304.6.2B. Maybe that's where you recall it, because we did write it in. From whom did the order come?
Yes, no, I remember that specific.
Yeah,
conversation.
so it was there, but anyway, I got two other points on this form, because they may be working with assumptions and forms are a pain to develop. So we know that the taser cam is automatic from the moment the unit is turned on.
Correct. It is impossible to fire the taser without the camera being on.
And it's impossible to display it without turning it on. Once it's been,
Well, you can pull it out and not turn it
I-
on, but they've been given specific instructions.
you have to turn it on when
You
you
have to
do it.
turn it
So we
on.
have a record. So there, at the bottom of the front face of the form, you have the question, was a taser cam used?
Correct. I asked many questions I already knew the answers to.
Yeah, because you.
And that was one of them. Also, what cartridge was used? Well, I know exactly what cartridge was used because I gave it to them.
Yeah, so I understand the purpose of that, and I quite agree, actually. But then, the other one is, I don't remember, and I was trying to look for it in the policy. Every person to whom, I'm sorry for the word because it's not technical, but if someone's been zapped, they don't have to go to the hospital.
They do not.
They do not.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Okay, and so then the question is relevant, did it cause the injury, and was that person taken to the hospital or for medical attention?
Correct.
Okay, so that one fits. Because it's not a given. But the other one then, I'm thinking of, for me, this solves every easy case, something we hopefully won't have to deal with many, but the one that we have to deal with, we'll need as much information as possible, and you'll need it too. So, you have on subject information, subject injured, yes, no, medical exam, yes, no, photographs taken, yes, no, videos available would be my suggestion. Everything that's come out in the news, except one that I've seen, is usually videos from somebody else. And I know you must collect them into evidence or you try to or whatever.
I've got you on this one. Flip
So-
it over, top of page 2, first question.
Right.
I got you.
No. Actually, let me show you. I did write it down to myself, but it says, because in this case, you're basically saying besides the onboard cam,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So-
Squad car video, surveillance video from a
From a
grocery store.
bank,
That's
and
right.
any video.
Right.
That's right. So there, playing the game of I'm asking for obvious questions, pull some on assumptions, because you want to get the assumptions out. In this case, the assumption doesn't come out because you've asked the question here. By pulling it here, you've pulled out an assumption, and here you're going back to, I have no assumptions. But you've already indicated that you have an
Correct.
assumption.
So the reason that I asked this question was to remind the officers, because I guarantee you, at some point, someone will forget and they go, you know what? There was a grocery store across the street or a gas station
Good.
across the street. I wonder if they have surveillance video.
Yeah.
So this was kind of a poke at them to remember, ooh, are there other sources?
Good. So question now, how many of those become actual evidence? That is,
All of them, if they
If you
have-
can get your hands on them, they're
All of them.
evidence. So we could have them in the end. I mean, I'm
Absolutely.
just, in my mind, I want to be sure to be ready for that.
Sure.
Okay. So I noted the assumptions and the poking. The consistency of them is the hard part to do. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't give you any more advice than
Sure you
asking
can.
questions.
Sure you can. Absolutely.
Anyway.
Well, we'll see you next time and the time after that. And if there are other issues or if we start to see trends or problems, we'll talk about it and we'll fix them.
Can I make a quick comment to follow up on something Ricardo said? And I won't do this again, follow up on Ricardo. Just for the public out there, there are places in the policy that require medical attention
Yes.
for
Correct.
people. If someone undergoes more than 2 cycles or is obviously having a problem
Correct.
with breathing or whatever, as noted,
I believe the word they use is distress.
distress, or is exposed to multiple applications, i.e. more than 2 applications, okay, so 2 or more.
3 or more.
3 or more, sorry. And we also wrote in that the special categories, such as suspected of being under the influence, pregnant, a taser lodged in a sensitive area, those people are, quote, should be as soon as practicable examined by paramedics or other qualified medical personnel. So
Correct.
I think we went a long way to try to not dig ourselves into a hole here.
Correct. The way I explained it to the taser officers and the non-taser officers is there's basically 3 tiers. We've got sort of the standard run-of-the-mill, no problems, and the officers on scene, specifically the taser officer, can provide that the subject first aid. And I provided them with first aid kits. It's not a very extensive first aid kit. It's everything that they need in order to treat it. And if it doesn't come in this pouch and you can't fix it with this, then you need to call somebody. And what that consists of is an alcohol wipe and Band-Aids. If you can't fix it with an alcohol wipe and Band-Aids, you need to call somebody. So there's the run-of-the-mill. The next layer is the paramedic, and I always describe it, or up. They can always elevate. If they go, you know, this one's a little bit different, take them to the hospital. That's fine. I'm not going to be upset with you if you take this person to the hospital because you think there's something out of the ordinary. So the next level is paramedic or up, and that's the special discharge categories. You know, under the influence of drugs or alcohol, pregnant, you know, things like that. And you were going down that laundry list. And the third layer was mandatory hospital, which is 3 or more cycles,
Right.
or someone who's obviously having a problem.
So one last one, Tom, since we're on it. I know this seems draining, especially after, several cycles by now of us, but one thing that you said, Chief, at one of those meetings has hung on in my head for months, and that is a taser is not a replacement for lethal force. And I have now since seen several videos in which if I was sitting there, I don't want to be making a choice. There's a real threat, and then a gun is used. And I think to myself, a taser is an alternative when I have a doubt, when I want to save it in some way and there's room for saving the situation. It seems to me, as the policy, the spirit of the policy seems to be that. And I appreciate that, because in answering questions to several people who are not so happy, I just have to go back to, so what would you have them do? Shoot? Because that's the only other option. And as far as I understand, as I learned here, there is no shooting to slow down the person. Once you shoot, it's lethal, possibly, probably.
It's to stop that threat.
Senator
Yeah,
Bass.
and that to me is a huge reminder that the myth out there is shoot at the knees, shoot whatever. That's not the policy. So would I want that, or do I want a taser handy? You know, I've now come to the conclusion that I want a taser handy somewhere, just in case there is room.
Me too. In fact, Tom, when you asked the question earlier, what's the feedback from the officers? I can tell you that I can't tell you the number of officers that came up to me and said, thanks for giving us another option. Thanks for allowing us to just be able to call somebody. I know we've called the sheriff's office or the U of I police, but now we have the ability to use our own police officers, not have to rely on waiting for one of them to come, as evident by last night. We stacked the team. There were crisis intervention team guys. There's a guy holding a knife to his throat. Fortunately, we were there with the necessary tools to address the situation. And I think the officers really appreciate that. And I know it's a lot of extra time on your folks, and Todd especially, but, you know, it benefits the city. It truly does, in my opinion.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody have anything else?
Well, I did have something else, but was going to be directed to these guys.
Are we trying to compete with the city council
No,
in
no,
terms
no,
of
no, no,
length
no,
of the
no, no,
meeting?
no, no, I got it.
I was wondering, I thought,
No.
that, or are you kind of going the European dining scene?
No.
Go for it, go for it.
But I don't want to direct this to these two guys. So I want to make it clear that we're done with these two guys. So
Could I
I'm
just thank the chief and lieutenant
You
for
certainly
all
can.
their work?
Yeah, thank you.
Because
Well, thank you.
you cooperated with us so beautifully, and thank my fellow board members for all your work, and
Yeah.
Todd, of course.
Yeah,
And Tony?
yeah. Yeah, Tom, the other thing I had to kind of bring to the table, and I'll just briefly go through this. This will take a minute or less. I have been reading through the Department of Justice report about Ferguson. And I think, although a lot of it in terms of police action, I don't think is applicable to Urbana, and I hope never will be. I think it offers a good opportunity for a real controversial subject, nationwide here, to try to educate myself, and so I would just challenge everybody else to do that. And at the end of that report, there are 13 real salient recommendations that they make to the police department of Ferguson. It's kind of an open letter to them in a way, to put it politely. And as we move forward here, I'd like to I want to work on this list of 13 and see where I think it might key us to things that we are or aren't doing effectively, and sort of challenge the group to think about it in that context. One of the things, this is all I'm going to read from it. Point 13, for example, is publicly share information about the nature and impact of police activities. Transparency is a key component of good governance and community trust. Providing broad information to the public also facilitates constructive community engagement. And they challenged the Ferguson Police Department to provide regular and specific public reports on stop, search, arrest, ticketing, force, and community engagement activities. And some more. Provide regular public reports on allegations of misconduct, including the nature of the complaint and its resolution. So these people, they're drawing a bullseye here, in a way, and make available online and regularly update a complete set of police policies. That's just one of the 13 recommendations that they made. And that really spoke to me in the context of this use of force discussion that I've been continuing to have with Chief Connolly. And I would like you guys' support to make sure that we get that on there. I mean, right now, you get on the City of Urbana's website, you get under the police department, there are 15 to 18 tabs underneath there. The critical intervention team actually is a recent ad, which I requested during the process of the review of the TASER stuff, and I'm sure hoping we can get a use of force policy on there so that the public knows what to expect from the people. Yeah, that's the intention. Yeah, sure. But again, I'll remind you, that's just one of the 13 DOJ recommendations that were made. And so, I'll be bringing those forward as I kind of think through them a little bit to challenge us about how good a job we're doing, I guess.
I think I'm more than willing to certainly talk about those and go through them. I would say let's remember that, and I know you know that, we are not Ferguson, thank the good Lord.
Yeah.
And so, part of the reason we're here already puts us light years ahead of Ferguson. The fact that you're sitting here and we're talking about those issues puts us far into that. Now,
Yeah, that's
Far
exa-
from
and-
perfect,
and
and
that's
certainly
what-
we have
yeah,
areas where we can
yeah,
improve,
yeah.
make
And-
no mistake.
And that's exactly why I didn't want them seated at that table when I offered this up as an idea.
And let me add, there are much more egregious examples lately of misconduct than in Ferguson.
Right. we don't-
Obvious.
Yeah, oh, for sure. We don't have a report that is as complete, I think, and multifaceted as the one that the DOJ did on that incident. And that's the only reason I brought it out. I mean, I'm reading it, you know? It's 102 pages long. So,
So I have two questions or one request, because we're going to move to announcements. One is clarification. So the report we got at our seats at the beginning, if I'm reading it correctly, there are 4 complaints from 2013, and all of them are closed by now?
Yes.
Okay. There were 2 in 2014, and it says NA for CPRB appealed. Does that mean they're closed by now?
No, well, yes, they're closed. One of them, the second one, there would be no appeal because it's founded.
It was founded, the
Yeah, and
chief decided
the-
if he
and the
took his
first-
action,
Yeah, the first NA, that should just be no,
that should be a no.
because it's beyond its limit, it's beyond the limit.
Okay.
But if it was founded, does that mean there could still be,
No.
okay, that's
The
what
chief took
founded
action.
means.
Because the
That-
only
okay.
thing that you can appeal is the finding. You can't appeal, for instance, the
They just
discipline
found
or
it.
the
Exactly.
remedial steps that were taken.
That's not our
afterwards.
job, basically. Okay, so then it shows that there are 2 incidents reported in 2015. We're in the
Correct.
4th one. And those are NA. One of them is founded, or at least discipline imposed,
Right.
right? And the other one is still open because of the calendaring and its nearness.
Correct.
Okay. I think that, for me, the part that I wanted, as I looked at it, this is the number of reports, this is the number of complaints. Is it the total number of complaints for the year?
This is the total number of filed perfected complaints. Complaints where we have where they've met all of the procedures that you have to go through to file a complaint.
Okay.
Yes.
So there are others that were started and did not
Right.
fulfill
There
those.
may be others, and I don't know.
There may
which
be,
ones.
but we're not talking a dozen. There
No,
might be
no.
things that got started, didn't.
Right.
So for me, that's the evidence that we live in a 3 Walmart town, and there are not too many opportunities for, the chief to be in front of us defending one of these cases or not.
Well, I think it's also evidence that we exist and the department knows it. And
There you go. So that's another way of viewing
And
it.
people are always concerned about how, but I think the chief would tell you something along the lines of, we had 22,000 interactions last year, and we have 2 founded complaints.
I think it's important that we also see the fact that he found
Right,
foundedness,
right.
So because there is, and this is on the announcement side, there is a meeting of a disarmament kind of group going on in town. I was trying to look for the details, but there is a group in town that's drawing those interested in talking about, in this case, one of the other law enforcement agencies having armament, like we saw in Ferguson. And so, there is that, and, you can Google it, you'll find somebody. But I think that's the kind of relevant, timely, in our town, there are people concerned about having military equipment by law enforcement agencies, and somebody's gathering to do it. So, anyway, I think it's important to point out that all those things eventually kind of come back to us because they overlap our goal.
I will accept a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
You jumped on that.